Welcome to Bill Myers Inspires. Today, we have with us Mr. Al Letson, who is a host of a 7-part podcast series entitled Mississippi Goddam. It is a very compelling journey and a piece of investigative reporting. And it's pretty phenomenal. I have had the benefit of watching numerous of these episodes, and I am absolutely intrigued, and I'm glad to have Al with us here today. Let's welcome him. Welcome, Al.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. So tell me about Mississippi Goddam. Let's just start with sort of an overview and a better explanation of what the series is, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. So Mississippi Goddam is the story of a young man, Billy Joe Johnson, who died in 2008, December 2008. And I stumbled across the story in 2011. And the official version is that Billy Joe was pulled over by a police officer. It was an early morning. It was still dark. It was like 5 something in the morning. And about 5 minutes after he got pulled over, he was dead. And according to the official version, Billy Joe either accidentally or intentionally pulled out a shotgun and killed himself. And so that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me when I first heard the story. There was a whole lot of other things that I was being told. And, in 2011, I made a promise to members of his family that I would look into what happened. And it took me a long time to have the resources and the ability to actually dive in and look into it. I told them I would look into it in 2011. And I really did not have the ability to do it until probably like 2018. And the reason is because like this was a deep, heavy investigative case. And in order to do something like that, you need resources and people. And when I first went to Mississippi, I was with a very small news organization. We literally had 5 people. And there was no way we could have done it. And then in the meantime, I joined another organization, Reveal, and I'm the host of it. And so Reveal is a investigative news. That's what we do. And we got a pretty deep bench. And so, so my boss gave me the resources, gave me a reporting partner, Jonathan Jones, and him and I worked on this case for 3 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's so what was it that drew you to it? Yet another, slain young black man and suspicious circumstances and
Yeah, so I'm originally from Plainfield, New Jersey.
Okay.
But I moved to Jacksonville, Florida when I was 11.
Okay.
And actually I moved to like a small town outside of Jacksonville, which is called Orange Park. And Orange Park, especially back then, was definitely like a good old boy town. And the police, as a teenager, the police could be pretty rough growing up. And you'd see all the white kids get away with whatever, but black kids, like you couldn't even like hang out with your friends without being harassed. And I saw some pretty rough things, and I just I don't know, like hearing Billy Joe's story, it just reminded me of like where I grew up. And then also like we hear these stories all the time in the news. Um, and I just felt like when they told me the story of Billy Joe in 2011, the best way I could describe it is I just felt a conviction, like a feeling that like, you know, not a lot of journalists were coming to Loosedale, Mississippi, very small rural town in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And then the actually where Billy Joe's family live is Bendale, Mississippi, which is even smaller and even more rural. And I felt like, there wasn't going to be a lot of journalists going there. So this story probably wouldn't be told if I didn't tell it.
Right.
And so that was kind of like how I got on it. And also, like my father have just raised me with all of these. I don't know what you would call it, but I don't want to say morals, but foundational ideas, right? And one of them is like giving your word. You give
Mhm.
your word to somebody, you got to come through. And so I gave these people my word, and I just felt, convicted that I had to tell the story.
That's very interesting. You described where you grew up, and then you described the circumstances of your community in Florida and how that operates. And it's sad that I must say that I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, and
Mhm.
the circumstances that you described, unfortunately, I don't believe know any particular geography if you're a black person in America. I hate to say that because that
Yeah,
sounds
yep.
like such a global statement. But one of the other things that you mentioned, I mean, you didn't want to say moral, you didn't want to say all that, but you're a PK, you're a
I
preacher's kid.
am.
Okay, so
I'm very much a PK.
and so as you use the word and try to find ways around that, and you use the word conviction, and I have to say that when something tugs at our heartstrings on that measure, your father would call that a calling,
Yes, absolutely he would. Absolutely he would. I
which
would
at the very least includes conviction. You cannot have a
yes.
calling without conviction being a part of
Yes.
that. So anyway, I just wanted to explore that a little bit, man, because I find that
Yeah,
really
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
And
I I I think if you listen to the series, you will hear um you'll hear a lot of my dad and like what I was raised in, and a lot of like what I believe as far as like God and my religious beliefs. But yeah, I think that and when you're a journalist, you're trying to. I don't believe that you're trying to push that aside. I think that like the best journalists like embrace all of those things with an open mind and try to uh, and use those tools. And so I think that like one of the things that I wanted to do is that exactly what you said earlier about that, like it really isn't about geography. It's about growing up Black in America and the
right,
realities that Black folks face. And I think that that's also what I really wanted to do in this story, because while it is very much about Billy Joe, it is also about Mississippi. It's also about America. It's about Black the burden that Black folks carry in America, and how like there are a lot of white people that worked on Billy Joe's death investigation, and I would say to you that like I think a vast majority of those people were not out to cover anything up or to to make it all go away. But what I do think is that you had a group of people who don't have the same experiences as Black folks do, and so
mhm,
therefore when they see this case and how they should go about handling this case, they don't think about it the same way that Black folks do, who have the weight of history. White people can pretend that they don't, but Black people have no choice. We have to carry it, right? And
right.
so I think that what this was very much about was diving deep into that and trying to understand like why did Billy Joe's family feel this way, and why did this case really call out to me. um, and it's because like of our shared experience of being Black people in America.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing because as you just identified certain again other key components. The one thing that I want to ask is uh, how did this experience of actually following through and do that? I'm more interested right now in exploring your own personal growth on that moral side, because again, um, as a journalist, as you want
Mm-hmm.
to present an unbiased sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing, but yet at the same time, there has to be some moral center of sorts.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
and so how did that experience of going through that and producing this piece uh how did that affect you on that
Yeah.
deeper side, on your internal self, your soul
Yeah.
self, your What level of transformation, or what did you walk away with after having done it? Because you're absolutely right. A lot of people will walk past these kinds of stories because it's, nobody wants to peel that onion back. You're also correct when you mention that perhaps white folks didn't, sort of gang up and create this, to do something intentionally malicious. Unfortunately, through the conditioning of America, it becomes a normal way that we process these kinds of cases with these kinds of people, and
Right.
and it's unconscious because it's what is called normal. I just had a show recently, and we were talking about the health conditions that challenge Black people in America, and what that's all into. And the woman that I was interviewing said, everybody's talking about we need to get back to normal. We get back to normal. She says, we don't want to go back to normal because normal killed us.
Yes.
We
It is,
like a new normal.
new.
And I
Right.
thought
We
that was
want new.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think she's 100% right. I think that racism is a machine that is self-correcting and or not self-correcting. Excuse me. I think racism is a machine that that needs nobody to run it. It completely runs on its own. It figures out what it's on autopilot. It figures out how to conquer anything that gets in its way. And what we as a society have to do is we have to dismantle it, which is something that like I think people just have to understand is that like if we do nothing, the machine will continue to run as it always has. It doesn't need anybody to like fix it or to do it will figure it out. Partly because the machine is also tied to capitalism as well, and capitalism is always about the bottom line, and so like it's a vast thing that in order to fix we have to dismantle. I would say that like the journey that I went on, how it affected me. I guess the truth of the matter is that like it affected me in it's it hurt. It's a hard thing to work on. To work on a story about a young Black man who literally could have been my nephew, could have been could have been my kid, could have been like all of those things. Like it was hard. It was hard to like look at like the systematic uh, uh, inequality that happens in Mississippi. I mean, I went to visit Billy Joe's grave, and there's no marker. There's just like old artificial flowers that have been put there, but there's no marker for this young man. His mother, who died like a year or two after he did, and the family would say that she died from a broken heart. She doesn't have a marker on her grave, and it just infuriated me. It broke my heart open. And I'm when I think about like how hard it was for me, I always want to reflect that like this is hard for me, but like it is infinitely harder for his family. Like they've had to like hold this stuff for 10 years, and that's why I did the investigation. And the family you know, they weren't happy with everything that we found because, there are questions that can't be answered, but they are definitely happy that we did the investigation because they feel seen by it. And to me, like, and this is another thing that comes from my, Baptist upbringing. Like, there is power in bearing witness. There's power in like saying, like, I see this, I see you, uh, and I stand in solidarity with you. That like this is hard. I think that also what we tried to do in this series is to really like. I think the one thing that journalists love to do is that like we're not biased and we're just going to give you the facts. And the truth is that, like, especially when it's dealing with race in America, like we all have stake in it. And so, and especially like white reporters who report on race issues, they have just as much stake in it as black folks do. It's just that when black folks report on it, we automatically think, well, they've got stake in it. And white people, it's like they get to be neutral. They don't. They're not neutral. None of us are neutral. We all bring stuff to it. And
Right.
so for me, it was really important that in this series, I was honest with the audience. And I told the audience, these are the experiences that I've had that make me see this way. And
Mm.
these are the experiences that my co-reporter, Jonathan Jones, had that makes him see things this way. And we're just really honest about it. We have arguments about it. We come together about it. But I think it's super important because it is removing that myth that journalism has that honestly everybody knows to be untrue. Everybody knows deep down that we all carry stuff. We just don't talk about it.
Right.
And I think for me, I just wanted to be like open and honest as possible and let the audience make their own decisions about how they were going to consume the material that we created, but not try to hide anything. Not go in there and just be like, "Hey, like I'm a black guy, but that doesn't really matter in this case." No, it does. It does. And
Yeah.
just like, "Oh, hey, Jonathan's a white dude," and it does matter in this case.
Who
So
happens
those
to
were
be
the
white,
things that we kind of
happens to
brought
be
to it.
black. It's like
Happens to
that
be
kind of
white,
thing.
right?
No, it
Just
didn't
happens to
happen.
be. Yeah,
It's it's
exactly.
who I am. You know?
It's who I am, and it's why I'm here. It's why I'm
Right.
doing this story.
Right.
So
Right.
so for us, like that was super. It was really important to lay that stuff out.
Well, okay. So now I want to back up and let's just talk about. Let's sort
Mm-hmm.
of walk through that process. So we know that
Mm-hmm.
you made a personal commitment around
Mm-hmm.
2011 to the family that you were going to do this thing, and at the time and for several years you were not equipped with the
Mm-hmm.
kind of resources necessary to pull this off and to really do
Mm-hmm.
it justice, as I would say. But so, and then it takes a while, and then you come across the Reveal uh, uh, group, and
Yeah.
suddenly now there's the ability. So, kind of walk us through sort of the whether it's the assembling of that team, how you rolled this thing out, how you were able to. And again, I'm not talking about just the sort of the technical aspects, but we're talking about buy-in. We're talking about
Sure. Yep.
people that
Yeah.
can be, you have to sell it first,
Yep. Totally.
you know.
Totally, totally. Well, it started when I first learned about it in 2011. The organization that I was with, and I should say, like I keep saying, the organization I was with. It was my little show that I had on NPR. I was the boss of the show, like I ran it.
What was the
But
name
we
of
were
the
super. It was called State of the Reunion, and we traveled the country telling stories about community. Like we tried to look at America from the ground up.
Okay.
Which is how we ended up in Mississippi. And so, but that show and that it was my first thing in journalism. And that show was not equipped to do big investigations. So when I first found out about it, I reached out to all the shows that I knew that did do big investigations, and nobody got back to me. Then like over the corresponding years, like I would try to like look into it. I didn't really have the money, as our little show was so small. I didn't really have the money to just go to Mississippi and look around for, a couple months. Also, to be honest, I didn't have the skill. Like I was really just getting started as a journalist.
Okay.
And then in 2016, I went to the Center for Investigative Reporting that was creating Reveal. They hired me to be their the first host. And I wanted to do the story, and I started talking to people at Reveal. It took a long time to get anybody to like really buy into it. Um, Mostly because like we were just starting a whole podcast and trying to get weekly shows out and all of that stuff. So everybody's attention was focused on that. But at some point, I got a little bit of money to go to Mississippi. Reveal found some money for me to go to Mississippi. They gave me a co-reporter, Jonathan. And then we started digging into it. And Jonathan was great because Jonathan, we work as a great team because like what I'm good at, he's not as good at, and what he's good at, I'm definitely not as good at. So like,
Right.
he definitely filled my deficiencies and I filled his.
Yeah.
And
Compliment.
so
Yeah.
yeah, we complemented each other really well. He's good at finding people. He's good at like going through documents. I mean, he will go through hundreds of pages of documents and highlight stuff. And I can do it, but not as fast as he does.
Right. Right.
Um, so he was great. So he found people, he got documents, and then we went to the family. And then when we finally got to the family, we found out that the family had a treasure trove of documents. And then that's when I came in, which like I really like worked the family connection and really helped build trust. So they gave us those documents. And then once we got those documents and we had all the audio tapes, then we presented it to the leaders of Reveal of the Center for Investigative Reporting, and they gave us the green light to start making it. And then at that point, it was, it took us 3 years because it took us a really long time how to figure out how to tell the story.
Mm.
I was really clear that this was not going to be a true crime podcast. And I think that like it took people a little bit of time to try to wrap their head around what it was I was actually trying to do. But probably like 2 years in, after we had gathered a lot of work, I just kind of like walled everything off and went into my little lab and made a draft of the first episode. And that draft, a lot of that became the actual first episode. But what it did was it kind of showed the whole team like what was in my head and how I wanted to do this story. And so once we did that, and figured it out, then we kind of got on the roll and started making more episodes and pulling things together and stuff. But yeah, it took a while. It took a while, and it's a huge expenditure for the Center for Investigative Reporting. So there was definitely like times when, because we're not, CIR is not a huge organization. Doesn't it? I mean, it has like it's a medium-sized newsroom.
Okay.
So devoting this kind of resources to something and this kind of time is a lot. So it took a bit to like get everybody to check off on it, but it wasn't because people didn't believe in me or didn't believe in the story. It's more because like resources are especially in journalism today, they're getting slimmer and slimmer.
Yeah.
So we figured it out and we made it work. And there was definitely this by far is professionally the hardest thing I've ever done.
Mm.
And I was telling a friend of mine, I don't know if I'll ever do it again. But I also like I told my friend that like we were having a conversation. I was like, hardest thing I've ever done. Can't imagine doing anything like this again. Like I feel like I've done what was laid on my heart to do, and I'm good. And then also in that conversation, I
I'm
said
good.
to I'm good. I'm good. In the same conversation, 10 minutes later, I told my friend, but there's this story that I looked into and nobody is telling it. And I think I could tell this. And he was like, oh my God, yes. But also, didn't just 10 minutes ago you say you were good? So it's like, the engine of my desire to or rather like it's not even, I wouldn't even say it's a desire. It's what it is that I feel like we are living in a world that is falling apart and crazy. And if I don't do something to try and help, then I feel like I am part of the problem. It's like, it's like, so I have to do something. And I don't necessarily, it's not something that like I feel like, oh, I want to do. It's more like I have this conviction on me that says, like, you see that you can't sit in your room and not do something,
You cannot unsee it.
You can't unsee
Once
it.
you see it, man, it's like, oh, over, when I launched my podcast, Bill Myers Inspires, was right after sort of the George Floyd thing, and I was
Mm-hmm,
absolutely
mm-hmm.
compelled to jump in. I had thought about, because when pandemic hit, I was sitting around and, everything dried up, everything
Mm-hmm.
on the calendar. And I was like, okay, now what? And
Mm-hmm.
as I sat in that space doing some soul searching, I realized that, podcast was kind of on a list, at the top of a list that I had to abandon probably about 10 years ago because I became caretaker for my mother. And so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
life changed. But at this time, I'm sitting there and I'm going, podcast jumps back up. Well, what would I talk about? I can talk about music, much like you. I mean, I have a varied background and a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
professional musician, professional actor, blah, blah, so I can talk
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
entertainment. I can talk about music. I can talk about cultural thing. And then the George Floyd incident jumped off. And once the George Floyd murder occurred, let me clarify.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happened, it did sort of zone in, and I went, okay, I need to get in this conversation on racism in America. I'm biracial, so I already know
Mm-hmm.
there's a story that I haven't really peeled the onion on, but nonetheless, this
Mm-hmm.
made me feel like this was the topic. Social justice, racism in America. That's what I'm going after. It felt right, but I've got to tell you, during that process and doing those shows and hearing week after week and diving into these stories and historic this and that, man, there's some times where the beat down is rough. I mean, I
Yep.
sat in silence with just like,
Yep.
I feel sick to my stomach. Can I
Yep.
continue this thing? But the more burning question was, what happens if I don't continue this?
Exactly. Exactly. Like, what is it that like you feel inside yourself if you don't keep putting one foot in front of the other? Yep,
Right,
I know
man.
it.
And if not you, then who?
Who? Exactly. That's the thing.
So,
That's the thing, man. It's I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like because you see all this stuff happening and you just you just want to figure out how you can be a part of making it right. And that's a heavy, heavy, heavy thing to carry, but also a necessary thing to carry because like if people do not have that connection with other people's pain and struggle, we're never going to move forward as not just as a country, but as a human race. Like we will be
absolutely.
extinct. This earth is going to do
Absolutely.
fine without us on it.
Oh, yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like it's about us. Like we've got to figure out us. So yeah, man,
Absolutely.
I hear
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think again, I have enjoyed it. It's interesting. I have not been exposed. I'm not a part or a fan of the investigative podcasts sort of stuff. My father's a police officer for years, so it's cop
Hmm.
shows, and I watch it on TV. You know what I mean? All
Yeah.
the last 48. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
first
Yeah. Yeah.
48 or something like that, and get great satisfaction of the storytelling and the unraveling of that. I
Hmm.
never wanted to be a police officer, but I was always fascinated with the investigation. I was always
Hmm.
fascinated with the legal part of that, because the lawyer or the prosecutors or what have to go in and tell a story. And that
Hmm.
part
Yep.
always intrigued me. How do you tell this story? You know what I mean? And
Hmm. Hmm.
convincingly, be able to persuade folk to see it a certain way. That's fascinating to me.
Yep. Yeah.
Um, but I do know that again, I was unfamiliar with this genre as it relates to podcasts, and but I know when I was listening to the show, I was reminded of um, old radio shows. I was reminded of back in the day when that was the thing, were radio shows, and
Yeah.
how you guys have treated that. I found myself going, wow, I remember enjoying as a little one some of the old radio shows that were still on the radio, Ellery Queen's Minute Mysteries and things like
Hmm.
this, where I was like, I'd listen, man. And, they had the sound effects guy and
Hmm.
walking
Hmm.
down the hall, clip, clop, clip, clop. And
Yep.
when I was listening to your series, it reminded me of that. I don't mean to be
No, 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 no. We're trying to do that though.
but I felt like I was alongside you guys walking through this journey. And so,
Yep.
and that's difficult to achieve. I mean, I know as a storyteller, these types of things are difficult to achieve. So I applaud you on the final product and getting there, because it very much brings the listener right in to that
Thank you.
space. And so, yeah, congratulations on that, man, because that's
Thank you. Thank you. That's one of our that's our biggest thing, is that like I wanted the audience to feel like they were in Mississippi. I wanted them to feel like they were with us every step of the way. And so, we pulled out all our bag of tricks to make sure that, I'm glad you feel that way, because it just tells me that we hit what we were trying to do.
Oh yeah, man. I was totally wrapped into it, and ready for the next episode, and so on. So it did everything it's supposed to do, as opposed to me getting through one and going, I'm done with this.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, so I just want you to know, if the goal is to captivate and hold the people in that place, it certainly did that for me. So again, congratulations on that. I think that's
Thank you.
fantastic. So, Al, there appears to be lots of buzz on this series and this work of Mississippi Goddam that you've done. And to, tell us a little bit about what all the wonderful things that have come about as a result of this. I mean, what kind of good news can you share with us?
Well, I mean, don't have a whole lot of good news. I would say that like there definitely was a lot of conversation about the series in Mississippi, and there's definitely been some. The family is trying to raise money now to get a lawyer to help them, get the case reopened.
Okay.
I think that one of the things that has happened is that like been a lot of awareness as far as like people talking about the case, and that Billy Joe's name is like out there. I think that one of the things that the family felt really strongly was that Billy Joe was kind of going to be forgotten. And so I think that is a huge plus. I think the hard part of it is that reopening the case means that officials in Mississippi who may have some tie to the case would have to like actually do something to get the case reopened. And so I feel like it may be hard. I think on the probably the best bet for it to be reopened would be like the federal government to look into it. Um, and I've heard through different people that like it's been brought to their attention, but like they haven't contacted me, so I don't know anything about that.
So it would
So
be like Department of Justice or something like that to take a
yeah,
look at
exactly.
this.
Like the
Okay.
DOJ would have to come in and or could possibly come in. So,
Okay.
I think that the biggest and best thing about, what's happened is that or us doing this story is just that like the family feels like they were finally heard. It doesn't mean that they feel like this should be the end of it, but
Right.
I think that, for them, I talked to Billy Joe's sister like a couple days ago, and she was just telling me like, you came down here and you did exactly what you told me you were going to do. And so that feels good to hear that, that promise that I made way back was fulfilled.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic, man. And really, at the end of the day, the impact in Mississippi and the possible movement towards re-examining this, I mean, I guess is the ultimate
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
That's what we're hoping for. Whether, I mean, again, like I think so much of the series was about how Mississippi is hard. It's a hard state when you're dealing with issues of race, um, and how you can get positive outcomes from it. It's complicated. It's hard. So you know, I, I think that many years ago I was doing some reporting in New Orleans, and I did a story on this Episcopalian priest named Bill Terry, and Bill was great. He puts up this thing in oh gosh, what was the neighborhood he was in? The Treme. He's in the Treme neighborhood. And so he would put up this thing called the murder board. And on the murder board, he would put up names and ages of people who died from gun violence in New Orleans uh, over the years. And so the murder board is huge, pretty big.
Mhm.
And his point is that like it doesn't matter like who they were, what they were doing. What matters is that they were human beings and that their lives were lost. So he didn't differentiate between a businessman who got murdered versus, say, someone who was dealing drugs who got murdered. Like, all the same, we're all people, and like, let's memorialize them, right?
Right.
And it's a beautiful thing. And I went to him and I asked him, like, hey man, can you tell me, like, what has this done for the neighborhood? Can you give me some metrics, some way to measure like the impact that this has had? And he was like, no, absolutely not. Like, I don't even track that, because like, that's not the goal. The goal is um, to memorialize these people and to say that they mattered and that they were here. And it's not about like, for him, it was not about like outcomes, but it was about doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And I think so much about like the Billy Joe Johnson series and what we did. And I don't know what all could come from it, but what I do know is that like, it was the right thing for me to do. It was the thing that I had to do, and I did it the best that I possibly can. Um, and that his life mattered, and that we should know that his life mattered, and we should know like all the threads that comes from that,
Yeah. 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 If you gathered all the filmmakers and producers, in the nation, man, they would probably
Hmm.
be busy for the next 200 years if we were to
Yeah.
take, you know what I mean, take a
Yeah.
moment and
Yeah.
just acknowledge that these
Yep.
people mattered and that they were
Yep.
here, because everybody has a story, and it's a
Absolutely.
compelling story,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So, again, I applaud you on the effort because, I find it to be a very compelling podcast. And again, the work is very fine. So again, I say that. So my big question, what
Hmm.
is next?
Ooh, that's a big question. I would say, well, for Reveal, we have already started on a new series. It's called After Ayotzinapa, and Ayotzinapa is a school in Mexico, and 40 some odd Mexican college students disappeared. And so we like look into that and what happened to them, and all the ways that it was with the government. A great producer is leading that one, Anianti Diaz Cortez, and so that's the next thing for Reveal. We've got a year of stories and ideas planned. Um, I am taking a little bit of time to kind of think about my next thing, but I think, the thing that I want to do with my work is I want to point at the systems that we have here in the United States, and how we think about those systems and how they affect us, and obviously thinking about them from a point of view of, as being a Black man in America. And so there's a story that I'm beginning to look into. And like, I think Mississippi Goddam is great because like we hit the South, right? And I think the next one that I want to look into is a story that happens, in the North, in a northern city with, young Black people and police officers again. So, but I'm at the very beginning of looking at that,
Right,
trying to
right,
figure that stuff out. So that's kind of where I will start. I mean, again, this is probably to do this idea in my head right, it's probably another 2 years, because investigative stuff takes time. A lot of stuff you got to, pull out. So that's the next thing.
right, right.
We'll
Well,
see.
man, hey, well, congratulations. And I certainly, like I said, I really enjoyed Mississippi Goddam. And I so look forward to whatever your next thing is. So, Al Letson, you're on the radar now. So, my
Thank you,
friend.
sir. Well, next time, like we will sit down and talk about it again.
Absolutely. And I look forward to that, man. So, again, it's a pleasure having you on the show today. And I wish you nothing but the best.
Same to you, brother. Good to talk to you.